A very, very, very good afternoon to you. It is the heart of the week. It's Wednesday, it's 12 noon, and that means compassion check-in. And I'm here with my wonderful virtual friends. I'm just going to get them to wave. Dr. Martin's in the top. Actually, if you can say hello, because in your picture will appear. Dr. Martin, we're waving to you.
Good afternoon, one and all. Dr. Martin Patrick here, novelist and the man who gets people employed.
Excellent. And Frank Munro, do you want to say hello to your fans? And you win the prize for the most attended member of the check-in.
Good afternoon. I'm speaking to my single fan. I'm a civil servant that works for the Ministry of Justice.
Wonderful. And next is the wonderful Iris, an outdoor swimmer supreme. Iris, if you want to say a quick hello.
Hello, and I'm afraid Henry is in attendance as well and very excited today.
Ah, the budgie. And in the last of my pictures, last but by no means so far, we might have other people who kind of knock on the door a little bit later. Danny Silvestri, a very good afternoon to you, sir, from your barber store.
Hello, good afternoon. I really like the heart of the week comment you made. That's amazing. The heart of the week. It really is the heart of the week, and that's why these sessions are so great. I really love being here.
Well, thank you so much. You know that when the it's quite interesting because I suspect certainly this series. My instinct is that probably this current series will be heading toward the end. We'll probably do one or two more, but of this current series, and who knows, we might find ourselves in another lockdown, all sorts of other things. And I suspect that there'll be other ways in which this will connect, or it might be monthly, or something might change. Who knows? But one of the things that's really interesting, picking up what Danny just said, that when they started, and a number of you might know, they started during the COVID-19, during lockdown and so on, where so many people were just forced to be in. And I really thought I wanted to put something right at the heart of the week, hence 12 noon on Wednesday. And so there's something really cool about that, really connecting to the heart at the heart of the week. And it's really good, and also it's during lunchtime, and so I love, you can't see this, but all of our guests, many of our guests are having a just nice sneaky bit to eat, and I think that was inspired by Mia Morris, who would arrive usually with something healthy and fruity to eat. But today we're talking about wisdom. Wisdom's our topic today, and I don't know who suggested it. I think it might be your topic. Dr. Martin. Wisdom. I'm going to hand over to you to kind of kick off. Hand over to you for this one on wisdom. I think from memory, you were pointing out that you were saying that it was almost a train of events. There's a number of things that all of these sessions have covered, and really it points us to wisdom. I'm just going to let in Maya in as we hand over to you. So Dr. Martin, if you want to kick us off with this topic today, wisdom.
Thank you very much indeed, Rasheed. Indeed, wisdom. It is something that accumulates. It is something that's acquired, something that we cultivate, something that becomes very much a part of being conscious of one's own being. Consciousness raising, as it sort of first appeared in the 1970s, was a process that was to bring awareness to us, to make us conscious of our own being, to make us conscious of our capabilities and capacities and what's lying beneath the surface, our subconscious, levels of stress and levels of aspiration, things that we wanted to acquire as a part of our identity. And because I was a teenager in the 1970s, and so many things about growing up at that time was fascinating to me, because I always wanted to be more than I was. And the reason that I wanted to achieve that was I knew that I was more than I was. I knew that there was so much to acquire, because if you live with grown-ups and people that actually have a sense of self, along with how they're helping to raise and guide and bring you up, you will know that they know more than you, so there is something for you to strive toward. So growing up in a Caribbean family in Britain, it was a process of selection and a process of what you were prepared to keep and what would you discard. And I knew that for everything that I could learn at school, there were things about my own Caribbean life and being that I would never, ever sacrifice or neglect. But I knew that there were things that if I only lived within a sort of Caribbean environment, there's an awful lot that I would miss. So selecting and curating and deciding on what to keep, what to learn, what is interesting but not important, became a part of how one acquires wisdom. I think it's really important to remember that as we are learning, we are actually moving from where we were, from a stage of naivety to a stage of awareness. And what is banked, in the same way that you would put money into a bank or things that you invest, it is that knowledge, how to deal with people, how to understand yourself, what is love, are your aspirations beyond the realm of your achievement. And all of this is what I classify as knowledge. I just want to, before I shut up and let somebody else speak, I want to say that during my research, during my PhD research, I read and I read and I read so many different things, and the supervisors told me, you can't have that in there and you can't put that in there, and that's interesting, but you must stay on target in your subject area of cultural anthropology. And I always knew there is so much that one knows, but there is even more that you can learn, even when you have reached a very high level of further education, higher education. And I always regarded it as important to understand, no matter what I'm learning during that research of writing that doctoral thesis, there's so much that's not in this thesis that constitutes knowledge and wisdom, awareness, compassion, a true understanding of what makes us human and humane. And I always knew for everything that I'm writing in this, there's so much more that it's about wisdom, to do with the people that you fraternize with, that you socialize with, I don't sit at anyone's feet, but Professor Stuart Hall was just so absolutely marvelous and he prepared me for my PhD, that I just knew for everything that I'm going to write, there's so much more to learn. And that to me meant understanding the meaning of wisdom.
There's so many things that jump out to me from what you're saying. And I was listening to what you're saying, and I was then hearing what I often say is I listen to the music of what somebody says. So sometimes I'm listening to what they're saying, and then I find myself drifting off into the music. There's something about the spirit of what they're saying that captures me in some kind of way. And there's lots of things that struck me. There's something about where we're at and a sense of where we're wanting to go, what we're wanting to gain. There's something about wisdom that you talked about, people are around us, people are older than us, especially when we're younger, and that sense of their wisdom and their worldly knowledge and so on. There's a sense of like inner wisdom and inner knowing. You know, there was that sense of in that, you know, when you just have a sense, there's another kind of a knowledge. And the one thing that jumped out to me is a bit of a sense of sometimes when wisdom is something that plays out sometimes in terms of our patience and our impatience. Reminds me of this, I love music, so it reminds me of that song by Junior. Mama used to say, take your time, young man, don't you rush to get old, and so on. You know how sometimes we're wanting to be somewhere, but wisdom, it requires patience, perseverance, presence, and so on. And it's different to knowledge alone. Anyone want to jump in here? And next, Frank Munro, over to you, and welcome to at the Centre Wave.
Hi, Mia. Just wanted to add to that. Don't know if you guys are familiar with the phrase "youth is wasted on the young."
Oscar Wilde.
But for me, I thought today's subject is very it's quite emotional for me, because I think it's, for me, I struggle to separate wisdom from experience, because for me the two are inextricably linked. And I think one you can't have one without having the other, if that makes sense. So for example, due to the passage of time, each of us on this call now are very different people than we were, say, a decade ago. Because the decisions that you would make would be now based on more information in which to make those informed decisions. And for me, that's where that wisdom comes in, and that's where I link that with experience, you know. So for me, I always have that thought in the forefront of my mind, is that if I could turn back time, there are lots of things that I would do differently. I'm not saying that I'm some kind of mass murderer or something, but I'm just saying that in terms of impacting on the lived experience of friends and families and colleagues, I believe I'm manifestly a different person than I was, say, 2 decades ago.
I love that. There's something very richly humble in what you've said. I love that line that, you know, that wisdom and experience are inextricably linked. There's almost something that it makes me think about it often, like in the sporting context and so on. You've got to go through the pain and the sweat and the learning and the thing, isn't it, for us to grow? They are interlinked, isn't it? And sometimes I think our ego would just want the wisdom bits without necessarily going through some of those kind of experiences and some of those kind of challenges. I wonder who wants to come in next. And there's so many of you. Well, Maya, you've just, your head turned sharply, and I'm wondering, because you're there, a mum and baby. So as a new mum, I bet you're far more wise now than you were before. I'd love to know your thoughts on this now, because it's interesting, isn't it? I'd love to know your thoughts on this topic about wisdom so far.
Well, yeah, firstly, just wanted to say hi, everyone, and I'm back with baby.
Yep.
And actually, following on from what Frank said, I think what like linking knowledge and wisdom, and the fact that I've just had this baby, and the baby's just over 6 weeks old now. My husband and I keep saying we think we've lived a lifetime in the last 6 weeks, and then we're thinking actually we've lived a baby's lifetime in the last 6 weeks. And with that, I think with every day, I guess there's been a bit of extra knowledge and wisdom that's been imparted on us, just because every day has been quite different. And we are definitely dancing to the tune of the baby, and what the baby needs. So with that, I guess there is this new wisdom that's developing. And I keep thinking of all the sessions that I've had the luxury to be able to join with yourself, with all of you. And so many words have come to the mind, but I guess just being in the moment and the magic and the miracles. I couldn't join the miracles call because that was when the baby was actually due, that she came on that day or the morning after. But yeah, I would say even from a young being, they impart wisdom upon you. So I think for me, wisdom comes from richness of connections.
It's really wonderful what you're saying. I think it's very, very powerful. There's something that struck me about, you talked about, I love that line that you said, and your husband realized that, it seems like we've lived a lifetime in this time. And of course we have, it's being the child's lifetime, and that day in, day out. What strikes me about that is every day, I think what often happens is that we forget that every day is full of so much richness or potential richness and learning. Do we really listen and learn the lessons? I was saying that, life is constantly teaching us. The question is, are we listening? Are we paying up? Are we showing up? Are we? Because there's so much, isn't it? Every day. But very often we're kind of playing this funny game, want that, don't want that, and so on. But the wisdom is realizing that whatever the experiences are, whatever the scenarios are, that it's rich, isn't it? There'll be lots of this stuff in terms of, Frank was talking about the stuff about experience. Well, lots of the experience of things that we wouldn't necessarily want. But it's interesting, the difference between, I have a saying actually, I'll quickly throw it in there before I throw it out. The difference, I wasn't even intending to go there, but I'll throw it in now because it's the only one that's got the word wisdom in it. So there's only one difference between the so-called wise and the foolish and the people who are happy and unhappy. Only one difference. It's the wise people and the happy people embrace life. The unwise and so on fight it. What I mean, and the unhappy fight it. What I mean by that is that the wise people realize that all of the seasons in life will come, And so it's how they maneuver it, they dance with it. They know there's going to be ups and downs, and you'll be telling them a story about something, they're like, aha, aha. They know it, they've seen the rhythms, they've seen those things happen many, many times before, isn't it? Whereas when we're unwise, we don't embrace it, we're constantly battling ourselves. I'm not saying the things we don't want to change, but there's something about that wisdom which is able to just take what comes along and to somehow work with it, and often to transform it into something else. Iris or Danny, I'm wondering who wants to pick up. There's probably somebody trying to ring now with more wisdom. Who wants to pick up from where we are so far? Danny seems to be passing. Seems to be playing pass, not play.
Okay, I'll come on in then. And congratulations, Maya. That's amazing news, and so nice to see you smiling and happy and enjoying life right now with the new little one. So really nice. Yeah, there's so much to be talking about on the subject of wisdom, I suppose. There's another quote as well that I think comes to mind with Rash that is mentioned before, and that's I don't know the full quote and it might not be the right one, but just that open-heartedness. I know I've often heard you talk about being open-hearted, and I think that comes with wisdom as well, to have that open heart for new possibilities, for new opportunities or new ways of learning from different people of all over this world, not even people, but nature, wildlife, however or wherever we are, there's always some learning to be done. And I think to be open-hearted to witness that is at the essence purely around wisdom, and how we can become more wise is just be open to that suggestion that we can learn from all of this around us, and also ourselves as well. My journey, or whatever you want to call it, and just through all these sessions, I came on these sessions to start learning about myself, and with all the great subjects that have been covered, there's definitely a better understanding of myself and much more learning that's been going on. So some might call it being more wise, or that's how you pick up wisdom, is just by being open to those new possibilities around you and everything around you, but also about looking at yourself and everything as a whole, and not being closed off to any of it. So having that strength to do that as well is often quite important, I find, to pick up the wisdom. And also one last thing I would touch on is that for me, actually, wisdom, it could possibly be one of the most precious things that we have in our life and in this world. Just that it's once it's there, that lived experience that I think Dr. Martin Frank were touching on, is once it's there, it's always going to be there. It's not going to just disappear. It's not something that will come. Well, things will come and they go, and our change and everything that we are learning will grow and develop and come and go. But ultimately, if you're open to all of this and what you've learned and what you've understood, it then it's going to constantly be there with us. It's not something that we will just as a tangible object have. It's in our consciousness, it's in ourselves. Once we've learnt that behavior, once we're learning those ways, that's going to stay with us. That's going to only enrich us, hopefully.
I like
my
that.
take on wisdom.
I really like that. I like those themes around that openness, isn't it? That openness with wisdom, and that the magic of it. It's one of those things that the quality of it is that it's something that only blossoms as long as we stay mindful. Yeah, and I think the quote that struck me is that there's two things that jump out to me from that, and I'm not going to invite Iris in. There's two things that jump out to me. One is, I think it's a saying of the Dalai Lama. I can't remember it precisely, but the openness thing you said, I think it's something that he says, basically he points to the importance of listening. Because if I listen, I'm learning something new. If I'm speaking, I'm just repeating something I already know. And that's very powerful. That's very powerful. So there's something about that openness, and it reminds me of a quote which once came to me, which is probably my favorite quote of the ones which are attributed to me, but I can't take credit for it because it just came like a song on the wind. And it is, if you listen quietly enough, life will whisper its wisdoms to you. It will whisper its secrets to you, actually. If you listen quietly enough, life will whisper its secrets to you. And I think that's true. If you listen, if you're still enough, you hear your own wisdoms, you hear life's wisdoms, things will come to you. Iris, over to you, wisdom.
Yeah, there is this interesting quote from Socrates when he was considered to be one of the wisest people in the world, and he said, "I know that I know nothing."
Yes.
You know, and I think that is the ultimate statement about wisdom. Yeah, it's an interesting one, what you were just saying, you know, because I was just reflecting on silence, solitude, and peace, and listening, you know, which seems to be the thing that the older you get, I find that, you know, you can just sit and without judgment just take it in, and then wisdom will tell you how to make sense of things. And so I think in the Western culture, I think we can have the tendency to overrate intelligence and knowledge.
Hello.
And you can have a lot of intelligence and knowledge without being wise. And I think the wisdom is to know how to apply and when knowledge and intelligence with the right level of intuition.
I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. That thing that, you know, intelligence is underrated, wisdom is underapplied. You know, and I think that you point to something so powerful. We often seem to prize knowledge, learning things, gathering things as the highest thing. Of course, there's rich value, isn't that? And we know we've got, you know, we've got our esteemed academic, Dr. Martin, for example. We know it's important, the role that knowledge, learning about all sorts of things is important in our life, in our growth. But we know also, don't we, that the knowledge without discernment, knowledge without heart, without compassion, without consideration, it's just stuff. And I meet lots of people who, they've learned a lot. Well, no, they've gathered a lot of knowledge and information. But are they wise? Are they even intelligent?
Well, in the Caribbean, you know, I think you'll know this, Rasheed, and just to share this with everyone, in the Caribbean, there's an expression that your mother, grandfather, your parents will tell you through a wagging finger, and that's the wagging finger, by the way. You are just an educated fool. An educated fool is someone, it's like, you know, oh, so you read all of those books, good for you, you know, and you've done all of that. Yes. Then since you read all of those books, how come you're still such a damn fool? And I will always hear those voices from my relatives in the background of my intellectual mind, because I will know, and I do know, that knowledge is not necessarily wisdom. Analysis is a form of wisdom that's based on experience and observation. Existentialism, you know, that's about self-reflection, that's about the decisions that you make, thinking about the choices that you make that affect your future. Existential philosophy was fascinating to me because it's about the self, but it's about the world that you live in, the choices that you make that shape your life and everyone that you come into contact with. And that's important. But for everything that you've learned, you can still know in the back of your mind that you're treating your wife or your husband badly, or your boyfriend or girlfriend badly. You can still know that you're lacking something deep within yourself because you don't have the ability to connect with someone. You don't have the ability to influence people, to persuade them, to bring them on side, or true wisdom, to hear someone else's experience and realize that's what I have been missing. And then you go to them, you feel drawn to them. So that connection of knowledge and lived experience and a recognition that somebody else has sorted through some baggage or garbage and they have moved on to the next stage, and you want to be with them at that stage, and then you make the conscious choice to do so. That to me is when wisdom is actually tick-tocking, tick-tock, is actually working. You think, aha, now I feel happy, now I feel better because Rasheed knows these things, that Danny knows those things. From your African background, from your Latin background, from your Italian background, from your Germanic background, you have this point of self-consciousness and self-awareness that brings me something that I didn't know, that is when wisdom falls in. And that's what's beautiful about living.
Mm. It's interesting, as you speak there, there's something just jumped into my mind, actually. You know, that wisdom and intelligence, well, and wisdom and knowledge, rather, let's put wisdom and knowledge, they're different in that wisdom requires listening. You know, knowledge requires gathering, but wisdom, there's a listening, isn't it, there, that's involved, isn't it? There's a hearing, there's a spotting. Iris, yeah, please do come back in.
Yeah, I think there's also something about human nature, because I just had written down a thing that comes actually from this existentialism, the a priori, so what's in us from before we even existed. And I think then, and that's the difference with knowledge, because you can learn and read a lot of things, and as you say, that doesn't translate in wisdom. But sometimes there's also I think the difference that intellectually it sits in your brain, but it doesn't sink into your heart and your being. And the wisdom part for me is that there is nearly like an eternal wisdom in humanity, where you don't intellectually learn, but you recognize and find again what was already inside you.
I love that point. I think that's a really important point, isn't it? That sometimes knowledge and even perhaps intelligence, you know, a certain level of intelligence can sit just here. But wisdom, it's embodied, isn't it? It has a different quality to it. It has a different feel to it, isn't it? And you know it. You can walk into a room and you can feel it almost, isn't it? It's a different kind of thing. Yeah, Frank, please. Oh, you need to unmute.
Oh, unmute.
Yeah.
Just picking up on Dr. Martin's last point, giving away my age to about 2 days. I got on the path. One of the things that I grew up with was I was told that common sense isn't common to everybody. And for me, the biggest insult and hurt would be not that I wasn't wise, but I had no common sense. And it was, you know, extrapolating and unpicking those two. So it was when Dr. Martin started going down, you know, open that door, that actually got me thinking, because you don't realise how certain events in time actually impacts, stays with you for most of your adult life. And you know, I could I could accept that somebody would say I'm not wise. I could almost accept they said I was stupid. But for me, no common sense. That was the line. That was the line that you just could not, you know, could not be drawn.
Such a slap.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, isn't it? There's what jumps out to me, there's so many events, isn't there, day to day, that we respond to and we like, we don't like, with, you know, the ups and downs, and people tell you all these stories, this happened, that happened, and that happened. And it strikes me that, and we're talking a lot here about this distinction, the space between knowledge and wisdom. And I guess there's knowledge that's pretty much acquired all the time, isn't it? Because there will be new events, new circumstances, new things that are coming in. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're getting any more wise as a result of it. And it doesn't mean we're making any better decisions or acting with more kindness, insight, or what have you, because of it. So there's something about that. I think there's something about, I mean, again, I'm struck by something that that Iris was saying. There's something about how we almost vibrate depending where we're at. You know, the wise person vibrates differently to the person who's just caught up in all this stuff. The knowledge without care is just this crazy merry-go-round of stuff, isn't it? And you can, you know, when you can see it in people, isn't it? There's just all this stuff going on without any sense of a centeredness, whereas wisdom has a kind of a centeredness. It's far more centered than the knowledge stuff, which is just here. Anyone want to come back in on this? Please, Maya, please.
I'd just like to give us something to think about in regard to wisdom, because what's just struck me from what you've said is that wisdom very often comes about through a group of people who are oppressed. I've known so many unbelievably great Black women who have acquired wisdom through the women's liberation movement, through Black feminism, through a process of coming up from everything that's held them back. And I've met, at the university, I met intellectuals who were as stupid as you could possibly imagine. And you just think, oh, move. I don't even have any time for you. Wisdom, I believe, is something that really comes about when one is coming up from an oppression, or one is coming through the kind of discrimination that raises a level of consciousness in your own being, a fight, something to move against, that enables you not just to acquire knowledge, but to acquire a sense of place in the world, where you want to move to, and why your liberation has brought you wisdom. And now I'll shut up.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Maya.
Yeah, thanks as well, Dr. Martin. I've forgotten what I was going to say now, but in response to actually what Dr. Martin said, I would say that wisdom comes from a place of stillness, and also I think linked to Dr. Martin's reference to oppression and maybe liberation, that freedom, like that sort of unshackling of whatever has been a resistance or created that oppressiveness within yourself, and a reconnection to that stillness and actually authenticity. And I keep thinking about wisdom as being something linked to age. Like the older we get, we often think, oh, the older you are, the wiser you are. But now I've got this baby, I'm looking at wisdom in a different light. And when she was first born, she just knew straight away how to feed. Like, just there was an intelligence or a wisdom there that it wasn't taught. And so I'm thinking about knowledge versus wisdom. And sometimes, like just in reference to the conversation, Rasheed, you mentioned gathering. Knowledge is something you gather. And Iris, you also mentioned about it being maybe something more existential, and inherent wisdom being that. And so I do see that there's this inherent wisdom within each of us, that perhaps as we get older, we connect more with that inherent wisdom, because maybe we come up against things that we don't identify with, or we have more resistance to, and that helps, that's a catalyst, or it helps us to focus in on the wisdom within.
I really like that. I'm just going to hand over to Danny in a minute, but one of the things that's just from the flow of this conversation, when you were talking there about, for example, your baby and the intelligence, knowing how to feed and so on, one of the things that struck me, I was just sat with this, and what bubbled up for me was that actually what happens in life, it would seem that there's a lot of innate intelligence, right? Which we often forget about. There's an innate intelligence, and the body's got intelligence. There's information, it's about how the hair grows, the pigment, and all of this stuff, isn't it? We over a period of time prize knowledge, and we prize a particular type of what we would call intelligence, a particular type of knowledge, isn't it? So we forget very often the innate intelligence, and often therefore we may not listen to our own inner knowingness, let's say, our own inner sense of self, and very often it's sense of hunch. Again, we go back to the Einstein thing. I was fascinated by watching a documentary. I think I mentioned it once, and apparently many of his greatest theories, first of all, emerged as hunches when he was a teenager. Over time, they were proven. So there's something from somewhere. Sometimes, when you've got, and again, you listen to lots of people, they just had a feeling somewhere. You hear it from mothers and all sorts of people. They just have a feeling, or we walked into a room, we sensed that there was an argument going on before. We don't know for sure. There's all these other elements that are part of it. I wonder if wisdom is when we really have a deeper understanding of the nature of true intelligence, you know, and the flow of things, that we're far more able to dance this dance with knowledge and know its value, and when it's, I often say, knowing when to, I was running a, you know, really briefly, and I want to bring Danny back in, I was running one of my Soul Trader webinars earlier on today. So I was running a webinar on Soul Trader. And toward the end of the session, actually you were on it, Maya. It was wonderful. You know, it was wonderful because there were a couple of questions that emerged. That what happened was there was a lot of doubt from the very mind out of, understandably, what about this, what about that, what about that? And an overlooking of the heart of that centeredness of trusting this. Because if I'm in here, I'm always going to be in a space of doubt. But decisions made, one thing to me certainly is that one of the difference between mind knowledge and heart knowledge is that if I make a decision by my mind, from my mind, I'm 5 minutes later, half an hour later, next door, next time I'm talking to somebody else, I might have a different viewpoint. If I make it, and I might not like that decision, if I make a decision from here, I'll always live by it. I'm very content with that decision. If I make a decision from here alone, I'll often be discerning, chewing it over, is that right, or what have you. So for me, there's something very interesting about this other space, this other type of knowledge, wisdom, or what have you. Danny, anything else you're wanting to add into this exploration or excavation even of wisdom?
It's all been such a good surgery so far. I feel wiser already. I think that it was interesting. The Buddha has such interesting points throughout his teachings on all of this. And the first big one in sort of what Dr. Martin referenced to what he was saying just a second ago, that, you know, oppression and that not even just oppression, but fear, or from if we've had such bad, awful circumstances in whichever way that manifests for each one of us, we have all known and been there to have been in a situation where it just wasn't quite as good, or wasn't a nice situation, wasn't pleasant. And I feel like that's when wholeheartedly you've had that experience of good and bad, that you can then become wiser because you'll have both sides, like both concepts of what it's like on each side. And whilst, you know, I don't know full in depth of the Buddha story, but he lived life of riches and wonderfulness and amazingness, and it was that questioning of like, is this all there is, or is there what else is out there? And then realizing as he goes around the earth and around, you know, outside of the amazing temples, it then manifests that there are people in poverty, there are people struggling, there are people in all sorts of situations, and to put himself in those situations, to realize that, you know, we can't all have it good. And so to be truly wise, you have to almost, it seems anyway, that we have to have that real stark moments of shit before we can then build up and become stronger and more wiser. And I know that in my own true experience, if things were so good all the time, I probably wouldn't even be here on this call, because I'd be living a life feeling like it's all good. But what brought me here and what brought me to all this was because of years of just my own stuff in my own life that's going on. And that's made me truly wiser, and just realizing or seeing both sides of good and bad. And I just find that really fascinating, and how much learning we can have through that full circle of life.
I really like that. There's something for me in that, you know, Danny, about that you brought in this good, bad, right, wrong, left, right, so on. One thing that strikes me for the I was going to say over time, but I want to even put time to one side. One thing, good, bad, right, wrong, left, right. So often these are just perspectives. You know, these are conditioned perspective. You know, is sugar good or bad, salt bad? You know, depending where you are and what you need and whatever. Is it, you know, one of the things that I find fascinating, take the weather. I find them fascinating when people say, oh, good weather, bad weather. Trust me, if you know, both sun, rain are all required. And I think as human beings, we become so caught up in this notion that this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. I want the sun. You know, flowers grow through both sun and rain, neither alone. And it's about, I think there's something about this recognition, which is a good word, because it is about that recognizing, moving from this notion of that this is how things need to be, to actually, and it goes back to the quote that you mentioned, the Socrates quote, I think, that then knowing nothing, realizing it's just about watching, isn't it? The flow of life, watching, You know, it's just watching, isn't it? That's the best thing about parenting, isn't it? You listen, you watch, you know, you then learn the baby's making itself clear what needs to be done. If we listen to the body, we know what needs to be done. It's not, doesn't require some deep thing. It's about being present, isn't it? It's about being really present. We can't be wise unless we're really, really present. Intelligence can't really happen without being really, really present. Very, very interesting. Frank Munro, I think we're due one of your insights or reflections.
Yeah, oh, you got me there. I was ruminating whilst you were talking. So, yeah, I think the last point that you made, I can get behind that. That makes a lot of sense to me, because amongst my friends, people say I have these Frankisms, and it was really interesting when you talked about perspective, because one of my phrases is, when people get so low they have to look up to look down, and it's an issue of perspective. And when you made the point that you made, for me that put that in quite stark contrast, because often I don't look at it like that. It's quite monochrome. It's either black or white. Thank you for that, because that actually made me step back and say, well, actually, it very much really does depend on one's perspective.
And thank you for what you just said, because I think the word perspective is such a useful word here. Because when we see wisdom and when people act wisely, what happens is that instead of the people who are coming from their viewpoint, their mindset, very good for you. It's like when people are having debates. I reflect now when I think about, a political debate or whatever, it's absurd, because the whole setup is absolutely absurd in a way, isn't it? Because I've decided that I am going to be battling for one particular point of view. So I'm not open. The setting is already one. If you look at, for example, things like the House of Commons, one group of people are sat on one side and other people are on the other side, and the whole thing is trying to prove that I'm right? The whole thing, isn't it? It's an experience of proving that one's right. Wise people are able to look and see, so they'll often hear, isn't it? That's like, when you used to have to hear about things like Council of Elders or whatever, and you get all these things, and they sit and they listen, or the stories, or even going back to the biblical stories of the Solomons and so on. They listen, they hear, they're seeing things from lots of different perspectives. So it's only the person who's looking from all these different perspectives that's going to see the whole picture. But so often we can just get caught from one perspective. So I'm so glad you mentioned this thing around perspective. And actually, speaking of perspective and speaking of wisdom, Mia Morris Obi has joined the call. Mia, we can only half see your face, so we'd love to bring you in and bring some of your wisdom. Mia, today our topic was wisdom. You must have sensed that today was about wisdom, and we needed some of your wisdom. First of all, a belated happy birthday. I know you've had a birthday recently, but can we bring you on the call? We've been talking about wisdom, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on wisdom, if you want to unmute yourself. Oh, can we hear you? Oh, you've frozen for a moment, Mia. Hopefully we'll get you back in a second. Mia's frozen for a second. Dr. Martin, you seem poised.
Let me drop this in for us to also extrapolate and just work through. As a novelist, one of the things that I would say defines what I want to explore is the meaning of life. Now, that's enormous if one's just going to say, my goodness, the meaning of life. How long are your books? To me, the meaning of life is happiness. It is one of the most difficult things to achieve. It requires a great deal of knowledge and reflection and self-awareness. It requires consciousness and compassion. It requires compromise and consideration. So the facets of life all draw in, move towards, or work in a vortex to bring us an understanding of consciousness of, I am happy, I have achieved happiness. So when I say I write about the meaning of life and exploring the meaning of happiness, the exploration of how we find happiness, to me, encompasses all the things that are really important in life about being a better person, being someone who is able to share, and someone who takes active steps towards bringing people into your life and making yourself a part of other people's lives, which is one of the reasons why very recently I got a great book deal from a publisher who just sees the work and value of what I want to explore. So I was very, very pleased about that. And you know that, Rash, because I sent you the text to say, yeah, my God, because that was such a wonderful thing. So wisdom, to me, is very much about the exploration of the meaning of life. And I would dearly love to hear from you all.
There's so many things in there that jump out to me, and I'm just about to hand over to Mia, because one thing that jumped out to me, it's interesting, isn't it? I think that as adults, very often we need to go on this rich path that you've talked about, Dr. Martin, about that reconnecting or that rediscovery of happiness or inquiry about it. And it's interesting, but as a baby or as a child, isn't it? It's often because we're not caught up in that, we have that happiness. So it's interesting, you've almost got the two polars, isn't it? That when we're as an adult, we find ourselves on a journey to find something, and sometimes it leads back, or sometimes it takes us to a new space of self-knowing. The other thing that jumped out to me was this thing about that in the last thing you were saying when you talk about the book deal and so on, being wise by oneself. You know what I mean? There's something doing right by yourself. When you know what's right for you. Mm-hmm. It's a different type of knowingness, isn't it? It's like, this is right for everybody else, but this is right for me. Mia Morris, OBE.
Well, you grow into your wisdom, don't you?
Mm.
As you gain in confidence and compassion and communication, you also grow in your wisdom. So as you get older, you have a greater appreciation of what's to come and what has passed.
I like the fact that you've also brought in that word, the confidence in there, because sometimes, I think this is an interesting point, isn't it? Because sometimes if I have confidence and courage, sometimes it takes a while, doesn't it, for me to step into, I do kind of know better, but I'm afraid. We've all been there, isn't it, when we're younger, or not necessarily younger, at certain stages, we might be, but we can't quite speak up, or we can't quite say what's right by us. And so that's a really interesting element of it. Danny, before the end of the lunch hour, anything else you're wanting to bring in?
Just lost all of your faces, and it's really disconcerting. Can you still hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I can hear you.
I think what else I'd like to bring in, I suppose, is humanity, and that notion of just humanity, and that, for me, I guess sums up a lot of wisdom in just the humanity of others and everything else. That for me is, in a nutshell, how I try to gather wisdom is through everything, not just that perspective that you're talking about. And I suppose whether we call it good, bad, whatever way it is, it's just that perspective of gathering resources from humanity and from this everything that's around us, rather than just one perspective or one way. And I definitely feel really lucky to sort of have everyone's perspective on here, and their notions of what the wisdom is and what it means for them. It's everything and above that's been said before. Don't really have any other things to add to it, I don't think, right now.
I like that. I really like that. It makes me think of something that came to me a while ago, which is about this thing about the magic happens when we move from being simply human to truly humane. And you mentioned this thing you mentioned about humanity. I think it's so important. Look at where we are. Look at where we are as a species. The problems that we're faced with can't be resolved individually, can they? I mean, look at anything from ecology to economic problems, political problems and challenges and so on. It doesn't take a genius to to tell. It requires just to see that, isn't it? So that thing about humanity, genuinely caring, it requires heart, not just mind alone. You know, the wisdom has, I would argue that wisdom has certainly as much heart, probably more heart than it does mind. You know, it really has heart. It really has, there's so much heart to wisdom. It's kind, it's compassionate. It knows that there's ignorance and foolishness and so on in that space, doesn't it? Iris, I'm going to invite you to begin our wrapping up. I'd love to hear your last thoughts of what you might take away from today, as we will begin to think about what we're going to take away from today. I'd love for you to kind of kickstart that process.
Yeah, I like the comments that were made earlier on about the connection between wisdom and happiness. And there was a really interesting program many years ago on British TV about finding happiness. And they were talking to Benedictine monks. And it's really interesting. They made an audiobook of that. And they're going back through all the different schools of thought. And in a way, it's nearly like people find the same thing in different ways over and over again. So it's nearly like the heart of wisdom has always existed, but then we involve and have different cultural overlays and political situations and agendas. And then the whole thing gets lost again. And then it just emerges as a new thing, but actually you find it already was always there all the time. And one thing that I found particularly fascinating about this audiobook was that it was talking about the deadly sins. And when you go to the old Hindu teaching as well, you find the things that separate us from the truth and the true being. They're actually, in all the cultures and all the times, there were always the same kind of things that separate us from that natural connectedness and knowing. And one thing he was saying is that initially there were 8 deadly sins, and they dropped the 8th deadly sin, and that was actually the spiritual renewal and awareness. And neglecting practicing that, and in a way that is actually the most powerful sin, because if you don't have that, all the other ones can sneak in, because then your head starts developing agendas and stories. So yeah, so I find the a priori of wisdom really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I like that. Just before I hand over to Maya, maybe for your closing thought, I've thought something came to me which I've thought about a number of times, which is windows gather dust. You might think, what's that to anything? But it's just like that. There's this continual process, isn't it, of checking in, clarifying, tuning in, and it's knowing. It's, for me, there's something about knowing something about the rhythm of life. You know, there's something about the rhythm of life that helps make us far more attuned and in tuned and wise and centered and renewed. Maya, I'd love to hear your closing thoughts from today's topic on wisdom.
Yeah, I feel so much to take away from the session. When I think back to the baby again, and when she sleeps, oh, she might be about to cry, so I might be cut short, but she sleeps very soundly, and there's something about that. I think the simplicity and the clarity of her world, you know, there's much less noise within her mind, and maybe it's more about this unconscious knowledge or unconscious intelligence rather than knowledge that I wanted to reference. And maybe as we grow, as we get older, we grow into our wisdom, we're growing into that unconscious intelligence. But it's not to say that we become more conscious of it. Maybe we become more conscious that it exists, but we will never be fully conscious of the intelligence. That I think the wisdom is just the knowing that is there, and that we tap into through life, through living.
I like that. I like that a great deal.
All right, I might have to go now.
We'll let you go. Well, thank you for that magic.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Lovely session. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Dr. Martin, can we have just a closing thought from yourself?
Yes, so everyone today has brought a particular level of awareness, adding and giving me more to think about. It enables me to continue writing. I write every day. And the reason that I can do that is that writing is the absolute core of my happiness. Nothing else brings me a greater level of happiness, because I draw on everything that the people that I know who work to change their lives and work to affect change in other people's lives. I see how they are. I am very aware of all of the work that they put in, and it reminds me of why I'm doing what I'm doing in terms of writing. And now is when you excavate. It's when you, or to be more precise, it is when I use all of the knowledge that I have. I use the instincts that I have, the stuff that couldn't go in the PhD. It is when I use the experience that I have through teaching and learning and training. Everything comes into the orbit of my ability to draw on everything that comes out through my head and out through my hands, and I write. And when I think about why do I want to write about the exploration of the meaning of happiness, it's because I want to become more and more aware and share that with people that haven't got there as yet. You know, people haven't got to a sense of happiness because life is an incredible struggle and battle. And so the question of wisdom is, to me, about the quest towards happiness and the meaning of life as I understand that. And being here helps me to explore that with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And just as an interjection, just before we hear from Danny, September the 30th, which might possibly be the last of this current series, compassion is the topic, which we haven't. Isn't it interesting? We've not covered compassion on Compassion Check-In, which is hilarious. Danny, closing thoughts from yourself.
I'll try and keep it nice and sweet, but yeah, Dr. Martin, I look forward to hearing more or seeing this book come to fruition. It sounds very interesting, what project that you've got in your hands and what you're undertaking. But you know, I can only feel in this short time that I've known you that you may be one of the greatest type of people in my world to discuss such a thing and to write such a thing. So I wish you all the best with it. And yeah, it's interesting, that next topic. No, it's and what I was going to say from that actually was that I'm reading a book currently, and it's an incredible one that a friend gave to me to just read. They thought I might enjoy it, and it touches almost on what Rash is saying about our next topic of compassion. So maybe I won't talk too much about it now, because I was really going to go into compassion, and what I was going to go into was the word of compassion, the actual word. From my perspective and what I've known it, I understand what it means, but it's truly now, since everything I've been doing, all the work I've been doing to try and help myself, but also reading this person's, it's a story essentially of, it's a story, but one that has loads of wisdom and loads of knowledge imparted within the story of this woman who basically gets locked up, and she has all these things happen to her, but through her own life experience, she's able to help somebody else out, which helps her. And the wisdom that comes around from being written in a story rather than just factual, this, and this, makes it all the more interesting to read. And I can take my own wisdom from it, even though the book is packed full of wisdom. And one of them was that she helped this person understand what compassion really is and what it means. And for me, with just her description of it within the book about truly what compassion is, it sort of debunked everything I thought what compassion was. And it's now I've got even deeper levels of understanding of the word compassion. And I know it's often sometimes said that the words that we use to describe things, they might mean that, but it's not really until we get that wisdom within ourselves to understand truly what each and every word in the dictionary means, when we can maybe have the fuller perspective of what wisdom is. So now compassion for me means something completely different, because I've got a deeper understanding of it. And it's because I've gone to that level, like we do in these sessions, we go into the level of understanding just one word, one phrase. And every session that each of us have, I'm sure, has some form of extra wisdom within us to explore and understand. If someone else mentions that word flippantly, oh, I now have that greater depth of knowledge and understanding of it. And I find that so amazing that on the surface, a word can mean something, but yet it means something completely different to somebody else, and then something different to somebody else. And then even to myself, it means something different if I look into it even deeper. And it just shows how much these words around us that we use are just pointless in a way.
I hear that. I hear that.
Where it came from.
For your help, Danny, there's a great book called Key Words by Raymond Williams. He gathers together some key words in culture and society, and then it begins an exploration of the word and its meaning. So find it, take a look at it, and I think you could find it very useful.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Frank Munro.
Hello.
Yeah, your final thoughts before then we'll end with Mia's wisdoms.
Right. I'm going to literally follow the path of Dr. Martin, because I think I've made more notes from this session than I probably had any other session, because it comes back really perfectly to the point that Danny's just made rather eloquently, in terms of how different words may not necessarily mean the same thing to you as another person. So as we were talking about wisdom, I remember I started off by saying, for me, that wisdom and experience are inextricably linked. But I now see that there are also other facets that are linked almost as strongly, if not more so, than I would have given credence to the same level and degree in the past.
Wonderful. I love that. I love that. Wisdom certainly includes openness, doesn't it? So, Mia Morris, we can see that you're typing away. I think that's your finger typing away. So we need.
I've got IT problems today. I've got a mouse that's not speaking to me. So.
Oh, so sorry. Will you help us wrap up with one of your reflection on today's topic on wisdom, or anything that you're wanting to share or take away?
Just what I said about you grow into it. Wisdom. Does wisdom come to you, or does it come from you?
Oh, lovely. I love that. Now that's beautiful. That's beautifully philosophical. And I think that's that's a beautifully philosophical place to almost end, isn't it? It poises. That's beautiful. I think that really, isn't that so beautifully poised? Does it come to you, or does it come from you? I love that. I really want us to wrap up there. The next session, which might be the last of this series, is on the 30th of September, when we're looking at compassion. Hope you can all make it, because it's going to be a very magical one, isn't it? Compassion. And thank you all. I'll be posting this up online. I think this will be an interesting one to watch back. Fascinating view back. And I'm sure I'll be in touch with many of you individually as well. So thanks so much. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Much love.
Bye.
Bye.
Right. Oh, let me take a picture. I'm going to take a picture of you. Stay there. I'm going to take a picture of you if you're still there. I haven't posted a picture of compassion check-in for ages. Where's my camera?
Rash, you use a screenshot on your computer to take a picture.
Oh, do I?
Yeah, you can press a screenshot, and then it will take a picture without your phone, and you're in it as well then.
Yeah. Brilliant. Excellent stuff. All right then, folks. See you all next time. I've just done that. Take good care. All right then.
Take care.
Bye.